If Kuningi was a country, today would be its capital city. On the very same day, General Khumalo mysteriously falls ill and can't face the Madlanga Commission, Julius Malema is convicted of crimes in East London. South Africa's political theatre just hit a new climax, and we're here to take you through it all. South Africa is not a movie. South Africa is a constant live-streamed season finale, which refuses to end, but which always serves up a new twist. Today there's so much to talk about, and I really want you to sit back and take all of this in, because I think this is a very important episode, and hopefully by the end you'll get new insight on the General Khumalo and Commission situation, but also the Julius Malema judgment, and probably most importantly towards the end I'm going to speak about the implications legally and politically. So stick around. Let's start where we need to start though, with the Madlanga Commission, which has taken a series of perplexing and worrying turns. We heard today, as we all sat down to watch the commission, SMWX was streaming, that suddenly Dumisani Khumalo, who was in the middle of explosive WhatsApp conversations that he was revealing to the nation about this cartel and how it functions, had suddenly fallen ill. Take a look at this clip of Justice Madlanga explaining the situation.
General Khumalo is not at his seat this morning. He left the precinct at 3 minutes after 9 this morning. He is not well. We, as the commission, have decided not to sit today. Our spokesperson, Mr. Jeremy Michaels, will announce when we will resume.
Off. That's all I can say. And you don't want to jump to conclusions because we don't have a lot of facts at our disposal right now, but you also don't want to ignore coincidences, especially when they start piling up. Now, we heard from the police, whose spokesperson, Atlenda Mate, said the general is following medical advice from his physician. His health remains our top priority. We are committed to ensuring that he receives all the necessary support to recover fully. Obviously, we wish General Khumalo well, but really this does smack of something more sinister, and those kinds of concerns need to be clarified, and the public needs to be put at ease, because this is all too worrying to contemplate. But on top of that, we then get this communication from the Madlanga Commission. I'm going to put it up so we can read it. It's a graphic I'm going to put up for you. And effectively, they say the commission wishes to announce that it will resume its public hearings on the 13th of October. In nearly 2 weeks. The commission will be taking a scheduled break from the 6th to the 10th of October due to the unavailability of Commissioner Sesi Baloyi, who will be attending to her duties as a member of the Judicial Service Commission. This week, the commission's public hearings would have continued until Friday, but when the hearing resumed today, Justice Madlanga adjourned it due to the ill health of Khumalo. So, two things there. Firstly, we're adjourning the commission because Advocate Sesi Baloyi has to go to the JSC. Didn't people think about this beforehand? The nation is waiting for information here, and now we've got to wait 2 weeks, right in the middle of being told potentially how cartels are controlling our government. It's just so frustrating. And then, can't they just two of them sit, and then Commissioner Baloyi will get the stuff on WhatsApp later or something? We'll send her a transcript, we'll send her an SMWX stream. And then you've got the public hearings would have continued until Friday, but now Khumalo is not doing well, which means that it has been decided that Khumalo is not well enough to come back tomorrow, being Thursday as I shoot this, or Friday. So he's at least sick for 2 days. So we are suddenly as a country now in this position where right at the crucial moment where the evidence was finally beginning to drop, we now must wait for 2 weeks. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. We also had the evidence leader, Terry Mutau, mysteriously withdrawing from the commission. No full explanation yet as to why that happened. So it's just so many things are happening. Like, obviously things are still sensitive with Natim Tetwa and his family, so I don't want to go into that too much either, but we had a former police minister who's now found to have potentially committed suicide in and around these events. Like, things are just piling up and there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. So, yeah, there's that. As if that was not enough for one country, we then had the judgment in the Julius Malema case. And before I get on to the merits of this case, on a procedural level, I do just want to say that to keep Malema there for 3 days reading out this judgment, I thought was completely unprocedural and completely unnecessary. As you know, I carry no can for Julius Malema. He's publicly attacked me because he thinks my platform was a weapon formed against the EFF to help the MK because I invited Floyd Shivambu onto the channel, which is completely false and wrong. But that doesn't mean that I'm not able to look at things objectively. And although there's no regulation against how long a judge can take to render a judgment, there have been far more complex criminal matters that have been summarized in a day, or even 2 days. But 3 days, that really, you start to think of just the way this plays out in public spectacle, and I just don't think it was handled right. I think it should have been summarized in 1 day, and we should have moved on from there. But anyway, that's a procedural question. This is the real thing. Because Malema has been convicted and found guilty of a number of different breaches of the Firearms Control Act of 2000. And this is actually quite serious. And I'll explain why I think it's quite serious. And it comes with serious legal and political implications. And I want to explore some of those for you. But let's just begin with looking at the counts and exactly what Julius Malema was in court to defend. So there's this act which regulates guns in South Africa. And it basically says you need a license to possess a firearm. This is what you can and you can't do with guns in South Africa. And of course, some of the things you can't do with them is you just can't be in possession of them, like even in under control of a firearm or have it in your possession at all. You can't discharge it, and you definitely can't discharge it in a public area because that could endanger public safety or public property. And so you can't do those kinds of things with a gun, especially obviously if you don't have a license. And that's the Firearms Control Act, which is just a fancy way of saying the Gun Regulation Act. So Malema faced 5 counts. The first one was about unlawful possession of a firearm, as I say, just having a firearm that you don't have a license for. And there's another one that goes along with it, which is ammunition. So those two could be separated, but they can also go together if the ammunition is in the same place as the gun. So those are the first 2 counts. So you can't have ammunition unlawfully, but you also can't have a gun unlawfully. The third is discharging a firearm in a built-up area. So firing off a gun, whether it hurts someone or not. And then reckless endangerment or failure to take reasonable precautions, where you might endanger. This is where you might actually endanger someone, not just discharging the firearm. etc. So there are a collection of counts that are around these gun laws in South Africa. And Malema was found guilty on all of these counts. So the possession, the illegal discharge, and the failure to take reasonable precautions, etc. But here's why things get quite serious, because in the sentencing of a crime like this, there's actually a difference made in terms of what kind of firearm you have shot off, right? And if it's a semi-automatic gun, basically, then there is a minimum sentence for possession, minimum of 15 years. So, and this is according to the, not the Firearms Control Act. There's another law which regulates minimum sentences. I think it's General Laws Amendment or something like that, or Criminal Law Amendment Act. But regardless of the specific name, it says that in the case of specific kinds of guns, semi-automatic, then there's a real need to dissuade discharging those firearms, possessing those firearms illegally, and there's a minimum sentence of 15 years. So from the sentencing perspective, that's serious. Now, I went and looked up some academic literature for y'all. And there's a legal academic called Pieter du Toit, and he's a professor in the Faculty of Law, Northwest University, and he wrote an article in 2019 about sentencing in Firearms Control Act cases. And I want to just quickly quote from this article, because it says, "It is evident that courts are more likely to impose the minimum sentence, that's 15 years or above, in cases where the accused is also convicted of other serious offenses, such as murder and robbery." So let's take a step back. What does that mean? Okay, so there's a minimum sentence, but often the court has discretion to deviate from that. So 15 years in firearms cases where you're just in possession, but you haven't committed murder or robbery, usually the court deviates from the minimum sentence of 15 years. But, so that would be good news for Julius Malema. But in such cases, little attention is given to the firearm-related offenses. So that's in murder and robbery cases, because they usually convict on the murder and the robbery, not the firearm stuff. But it says, in cases, and this is probably the most important part, and the last sentence, in cases where the accused, this being Malema, is convicted of the standalone offense of unlawful possession of a semi-automatic firearm, which is the situation Malema is in, the courts are nevertheless taking an increasingly unsympathetic stance towards offenders, and terms of imprisonment in the range of 7 to 10 years are commonly imposed. And in the article, du Toit goes on to a number of different cases where there was a 7-year sentence imposed and an 8-year sentence imposed on unlawful possession of a semi-automatic firearm. So in terms of sentencing, what the courts have said in case law is that there's a need to deter society, particularly around these semi-automatic weapons. And so the court has to balance the needs and the rights of the convicted person also against the need for deterrence in society. So that's kind of where the case law is at the moment. So this is a serious crime with serious sentencing repercussions, and that has been discussed to some extent in case law and the academic literature, especially the possession charge. So where to from here? Because, like I say, in some of those cases, they were a little bit more serious than the Malema case. So one of them where I think 7 years was given, there was a child who was close by, and even though the child wasn't hurt, the real risk caused the judge to impose the 7-year sentence. So, but even if we're talking less than the 7 or 8 years, we're still in the realm of quite significant sentences here, at least in terms of past law. Of course, Malema now, and let's talk about where this goes from here, is going to institute a series of appeals. And I want to cut to Julius Malema, not necessarily the judgment, but I want to cut straight to Julius Malema because he is now reacting to the guilty verdict. Let's take a look.
You must not be deterred. We live here highly determined. We are going to fight this up until the Constitutional Court. We are coming on the 23rd of January for sentencing, and after sentencing, we will immediately put an appeal so that we can go to the higher court because we think a judgment is faulty. The strategy has always been you must try to charge Malema with everything. One day, maybe we'll find a racist judge who will find him guilty, whether he's guilty or not.
So, what's important there for my purposes right now is Malema expressing his intention to appeal. And of course, that is still open to him. So what would typically happen here is that you'd get an appeal. So what's going to happen is in January, there's going to be pre-sentencing, and that could even be drawn out for a while, because what that would involve is a series of reports from social workers, psychologists, etc., which then would go to the court to talk about the convicted person in relation to their sentencing. But ultimately, a sentence will then be imposed by the court. It could be on that day, it could be if that little pre-sentencing process takes a few days, it could be later, but let's say early next year, you could then have the sentencing imposed. And then I would expect is immediately Malema will appeal and apply for leave to appeal. And while he does that, he will then also apply for bail while he appeals this sentencing. And usually in cases like this, having done a bit of my own research and spoken to a few lawyers about it, usually you would expect bail pending appeal to be granted because Malema is not a flight risk. It's first-time offender, so there would probably be relatively strong grounds for bail, although the bar is a bit higher because he then would be a convicted person. But bail pending appeal is likely to be granted, which means that Malema probably wouldn't go to jail while the appeal process unfolds. And then again, he could probably appeal to the High Court, and then from the High Court to the SCA. Whether he would then appeal, if unsuccessful at the SCA, to the Con Court is not obvious, because he would have to have some kind of constitutional matter to go to the Con Court. The Con Court doesn't usually just deal with basic criminal appeal cases in the sense of cases which don't have a direct constitutional bearing. But presumably, if he goes all the way to the Con Court, he'll try and find some kind of constitutional issue which is central to the case where that appeal would be heard. But it's not, obviously constitutional hearings are not for the taking. But certainly the SCA, all the way to the SCA, we know that could happen. And that's a long process. We could be talking years there, 2 years, maybe 3 years in terms of appeals, assuming that there are no interlocutory applications in between, etc. So in terms of the real world consequences, particularly for the liberty of Julius Malema right now, it's if he gets bail pending appeal, which I think is likely, it's really only and if his sentence is high, because again, the judge might well give him a suspended sentence or impose a relatively short sentence, or both, a short sentence which is also suspended. Even if that happens, Julius Malema can still appeal, but if he, in the worst case for him, if he was given a custodial sentence, in other words, sent to jail, then he could appeal this for quite a number of years, as long as he was on bail pending appeal. Now, that process, of course, will terminate at some point. We don't know how long it could take, 5 years, 3 years, in the worst case scenario, 2 years. And then once the SCA comes to a decision, or if he's successful in petitioning the Concourt and the Concourt hears it and they make a decision, which again could take long, then that's it. Then the sentence would have to begin if there is a custodial sentence. And of course, that would have massive implications for Julius Malema. I'm sure behind the cameras and all of that, it is a difficult moment for him, even though he's cutting a very defiant figure. And so there's that. So it really depends on what this judge decides in terms of sentencing, and whether she errs on the side of leniency, which could very well be the case, or imposes a harsher sentence. And so we'll have to see what happens. But these are just some of the scenarios that I'm painting for you. But here's the thing, because there are a number of political implications outside of the direct legal implications for now. And I know we have a lot of great lawyers watching this channel, so comment down below. Lawyers have lots of different opinions. If anyone's particularly knowledgeable about criminal procedure, help us in the comments to unpack and understand this, because this is all relatively new. So here are the political implications, which I think are potentially more important. You might remember a certain section of the Constitution called Section 147. And this was, if you remember the Jacob Zuma Constitutional Court case just before the election in 2024, you'll remember that there was a Concord case where Jacob Zuma was trying to go to Parliament because he was the number one member on the MK party list. But he was actually barred from going into Parliament because there are certain conditions which prevent anyone from becoming a member of the National Assembly. So the section is Section 47, 1E. And I want to read it out because it's actually quite important. It says, anyone who, after this section took effect, so that's us now, is convicted of an offense and sentenced to more than 12 months imprisonment without the option of a fine. So let's just stop there. This is really important politically for Julius Malema and the EFF and South African politics, because if you're convicted for 12 months, even if that's suspended, but without the option of a fine, then, and it says either inside the Republic or outside the Republic, then you are effectively disqualified from being a member of the National Assembly. But that only kicks in, and the section continues, but no one may be regarded as having been sentenced until an appeal against the conviction or sentence has been determined, or until the time for an appeal has expired. Okay, so let's look at that. So if Malema is convicted and sentenced to more than 12 months, but he appeals, then this section won't kick in yet until the appeal is exhausted. So it could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So even if Malema is sentenced, he's been convicted, but if he's sentenced to more than 12 months early next year, that doesn't mean he won't be able to go back to Parliament immediately. It means only until his appeal process is exhausted, then he wouldn't be able to go back to Parliament. If his appeal is unsuccessful, of course, because he might successfully appeal both the conviction and the sentence, by the way. Now, the final part of this clause is important. It says a disqualification under this paragraph ends 5 years after the sentence has been completed. So only after the sentence is completed, you start counting 5 years, and only after that 5 years can you come back to Parliament. So again, let me paint the scenarios for you. In the best case for Julius Malema, he's sentenced to less than 12 months, or he's given a fine, and he can go back to Parliament. And that sentence may be suspended, and he doesn't actually end up having to serve any incarceration. In the worst case, he's sentenced to more than 12 months, and he gets bail pending appeal, but after his appeals, he's still unsuccessful and therefore has to serve his sentence. And then after he has served his sentence, he's still not allowed to be a member of parliament for 5 years after that. So the longer the appeals go, in the worst case, if he's still convicted and sentenced after the appeals, he's not going to be able to be a member of parliament for 5 years. So that would be quite debilitating to his parliamentary and political career. He could obviously still continue as leader of the EFF and maybe he wants some time away from parliament. I hear parliamentarians get quite bored out there. But still, there are serious implications because he couldn't be a member of parliament, potentially running, let's say, on his party's list for the 2029 election if this thing gets dragged out over a number of years. Similarly, we've seen with the likes of Dr. John Hlophe, who wasn't convicted of a crime, by the way, but a series of NGOs then went to the Judicial Services Commission, where Julius Malema also sits. He'll probably be seeing Commissioner Sesi Baloyi there soon. But he won't be able to, or there could be a move to prevent him from sitting there because the courts, I know the judgment is now under appeal, so we don't know the final verdict, but courts have already said, I think the High Court has said, Hlophe is not allowed to sit on the JSE because he was impeached. So there's some new standard of ethical behavior that has been imposed on members of parliament who serve on the JSE. So you could have NGOs running to court to say, can Julius Malema still be on the JSE when he's been convicted, even if he hasn't yet been sentenced, and even if there's still an appeal. Now, again, that might be a weak case because Julius Malema might then go and say, well, just wait for my appeals, and then we'll take it from there. But again, there are lots of political and legal implications here. A further implication is what Malema chooses to do after this judgment, because we know that contempt is also a very serious question around here. And so for Malema, it's going to be a question of deciding what he wants his political supporters to say and what he wants to say after the judgment, because he probably doesn't also want to find himself in the situation of criticizing the judge or the judgment too much, in which case, again, AfriForum, who ended up bringing this case in the first place, is going to try bring a contempt proceedings. So, and Malema was definitely, shall we say, defiant after court today, in typical style, in typical fashion. But in this particular instance, we'll have to see what further gets said and what the implications of that might be. So there are all these potential ramifications that flow from this. Politically speaking, though, as well, don't make the mistake of thinking necessarily that being convicted in South Africa of a crime like this at a political rally is necessarily politically a bad thing. Julius Malema will, of course, and his EFF supporters have already started casting this as persecution, casting this as an attempt to limit his freedom of expression, limit his freedom of speech, making this appear as if it is a vindictive attempt to use any means necessary to get Julius Malema out of the political way by the system. So there's certainly political mileage that can be gained out of this from Julius Malema, and he will continue, I think, down that strategy of saying the system is coming after me. Now, it's going to be quite interesting to see how the EFF plays this in the weeks and months to follow. But yes, there are those political implications as well. So but one thing I will also say, maybe in Julius Malema's defense in a weird way, is that Malema's been brought before court twice in recent years One for pushing someone where he was in court with Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, you'll remember, and they were acquitted. And once now for this firearms contraventions case, where he's now been convicted. To be fair, he has faced the music and faced his cases. And one does wonder how so many ANC ministers who have been not convicted, but found in commissions of inquiry to have broke the law, not only didn't face any trials or cases, but actually got promoted and continued to be promoted and continued to live their best lives. So politically speaking, again, now I'm out of the legal realm, there is going to be this argument that, well, it seems like the NPA is very ready to charge Malema for anything, but not those for whom there is already quite a large amount of evidence in serious crimes like corruption, etc. So there's also that angle of it. Be that as it may, a massive day in South African politics. Of course, we will see how all of this plays out. What I've tried to do in this episode is equip you with the knowledge of what the legal questions are and what the political questions are as well. I'm not really getting into was it wise that night to discharge the firearm and all of that. We can do that in another video. But now you know what the potential scenarios are. So to summarize, the Madlanga Commission is on a break. Julius Malema has been convicted, but a long legal and political road ahead. And of course, next week, the parliamentary inquiry into Mkhwanazi's allegations begins. And I'm really looking forward to that. Fam, I can't tell you much, but what I can tell you is stay tuned to this channel, because you're not ready for some of the things that we're going to bring you. This is fast becoming one of the biggest podcasts in South Africa, never mind just political podcasts. And I really thank you for riding with me to take us to this level. Last month, September, was the first time we ever did 5 million views in just 1 month. 5 million views a month is crazy. So thank you for helping us together to reach these crazy numbers, to take this channel to the place we always dreamed it would go, and for riding with me on SMWX. I'll see you soon for more interviews and analysis. Keep it locked on SMWX, and see you on the next one. Aye.